holy hush in full effect just now. Man, it was pretty thunderous last night. I was sleeping so peacefully, and then an Amber Alert went off, and it woke me up saying tornado warning. And I had a missed call from Dan saying she'd get in the shelter. He said he texted that in the little uh, storm shelter in the backyard in that house. So I went there for a bit, for like 20 minutes or so, and I was fine. And so, it was a little scary. My first time in a shelter like that, in a storm shelter. So luckily, I didn't see any tornadoes. So yeah, I guess y'all were all safe since y'all are here now. So yeah, we all made it through last night. So still in Genesis, nearing the end, less than 10 chapters to go here. Last week, we got through chapters 41 through about halfway through 43. We finished 41, seeing how Joseph was telling Pharaoh how he needed to start preparing for the famine that was going to come. And then as they start preparing, Pharaoh puts Joseph as the governor of Egypt. And in chapter 42, we see Joseph's brother come to Egypt for food, but Joseph accuses them of being spies, and to defend themselves, Simeon is bound to stay in Egypt while the rest go and get Benjamin so they can prove their innocence per Joseph's request and get the food they need to survive the famine. And so in chapter 43, they eventually need more food, and so Jacob tells them to go back, but they say, we can't go back without Benjamin, because that is what the governor of Egypt, who is Joseph, said for us to do. And so Jacob, he wonders why they even told Joseph about Benjamin, but he ends up letting them go with him. And so they're on their way back to Egypt now to get more food with Benjamin. They can prove their innocence and get more food to survive through this famine. And Jacob tells them to bring gifts along with Benjamin and themselves so they can hopefully appease this governor's wrath, since they had waited so long to come back already. So we had left off in verse 15. As I've been studying through this book, I guess specifically Joseph, the story of Joseph and his family as a whole has definitely been, for me, the most interesting part of this book. Seeing how everything is working through the hand of God, and seeing how his power is seen through all these circumstances that come to pass through these last, 15 or so chapters is very interesting to study here. Hope all y'all are enjoying it as well. But again, in verse 15 here, so Jacob sends his sons on the way back to Egypt with Benjamin and gifts for Joseph. And they don't know he's Joseph, but at this point, I'm just calling him Joseph still, because that's obviously who he is. We know that. But verse 15, the men took that present, and they took the double money in their hand, and Benjamin, and they rose up and went down to Egypt, and they stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with him, he said to the ruler of his house, bring these men home, and slay and make ready, for these men shall dine with me at noon. So he's inviting them to have dinner with him as they come back here. In verse 17, the man did as Joseph bade, and the man brought the men into Joseph's house. So he's about to have a meal with all of his brethren here. At first glance, you might assume from the brothers' eyes that they must have thought that these gifts they brought did a lot to calm Joseph, but their reaction to an invitation to eat with him goes along a different path here. Verse 18, when Joseph invited them to eat, they were afraid. They weren't thinking that this was a good invitation. It says in verse 18, they were afraid because they were brought into Joseph's house. And they said, because of the money that was returned in our sacks at the time we were first brought in, that he may seek occasion against us and fall upon us and take us for bondmen and our donkeys. So they think he's just telling them to come into his home to have dinner so he can end up making them servants, stealing all their stuff. Or I guess in a position of a governor, he wouldn't necessarily be stealing per se as a criminal, but he would just be taking them as hostage, essentially. And so they're not having any good reactions about this. They are suspicious of Joseph's true intention here. Yes, sir?
What they're afraid of is a trap.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to get them out of the public eye
trap Joseph is gonna get them in to get his stuff back in their eyes, what they're thinking. And so, since they're nervous about this, they're all here. They know that they're gonna eat supper with Joseph as since they're suspicious of it. But verse 19, they're gonna go ahead and confess to what has been done, even though they hadn't stole the money. It had appeared in their sacks. They weren't aware of it, but they go ahead and tell everything that happens. Verse 19 and onward, it says, they came near to the steward of Joseph's house, and they communed with him at the door of the house, and said, O sir, we came indeed down at the first time to buy food, and then it came to pass when we came to the inn that we opened our sacks, and behold, every man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight, and we have brought it again in our hand. And other money have we brought down in our hands to buy food, but we cannot tell you who put our money in our sacks. So they're not trying to say they did anything wrong, but they're just saying everything of what happened. So they're not seen as people who are trying to deceive in any way. They're not holding anything back from the steward. And so these brothers recognizes that they needed to tell everything that happened, but the steward, he responds to them. He says, peace be to you. He says, fear not, your God and the God of your father hath given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money. And he brought Simeon out unto them. And so to hear this from the steward must have been quite calming for them to realize they're not in any immediate danger here. The steward recognizes God's hand in all this, admitting that they were being blessed in having more money than when they first came. William Gresham writes it as, in essence, he had functioned as God's instrument of grace in returning the money to them. And so he tells them, you're not in any trouble. And so, verse 24, the man brought them into Joseph's house and gave them water, and they washed their feet, and he gave their donkeys provender. So they're making themselves as sort of servants to these men, serving them, washing their feet, and feeding them, giving them water here, feeding their donkeys even. And it says in verse 25, then they made the present against Joseph, and they made ready the present against Joseph when he came at noon, for they heard that they should eat bread there. So they're getting the gifts they had prepared for Joseph ready. And so when Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in their hand into the house and bowed themselves to the earth. So the brothers are being treated very well here by Joseph's steward and Joseph's servants, and they got the gifts ready to give to him, and things were going much smoother, seemingly, than they had first expected it to be in their eyes. And so they give the present to him, and now as they're all in this room together, Joseph, in verse 27, it says he asks them of their welfare, asking them, just making conversation, how are they doing? He says, is your father well? The old man of whom you spake, is he yet alive? They had mentioned him the last time they were here, and so Joseph's trying to get as much information about his family as he can still. And so he says, is your father still alive? And they answered, verse 28, saying, thy servant, our father, is in good health. He is yet alive. So they are calling their father a servant to Joseph. They're trying to still be as respectful as possible, saying that they're all under him in terms of authority. And so they're calling their father his servant as well here. Again, just trying to be respectful. And they bowed down their heads and made obeisance. And so we saw that word before, and that just means to bow here. And so, verse 29, as they're all here bowing to him, being respectful, Joseph lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son. Benjamin wasn't with them before, but now he is. So this is the first time Joseph has seen him in many, many years. And it says, he says, is this your younger brother, of whom you spake unto me? And he said, God be gracious unto thee, my son. And Joseph made haste, for his bowels did yearn upon his brother, and he sought where to weep. And he entered into his chamber and wept there. And so he's covering all the bases of trying to learn as much as he can of his family. And once he sees that Benjamin, his only full blood brother, is there with him, he gets a little choked up here. He has to find a place to cry in private, so he doesn't reveal anything just yet of who he is unto them. So he has to go into his chambers to let his tears out. This is obviously a very kind and sweet thing on Joseph's part. He obviously just misses his brother Benjamin. I'm sure he misses all of them, but now this is again, the first time he's seen Benjamin in quite a while. So he cries in his chamber. It says he wept there. And then verse 31, he washed his face. He went out and refrained himself. And he said, set on bread. And they set on for him by himself, and for them by themselves, and for the Egyptians which did eat with him by themselves. And so there's about three groups here. There's Joseph eating alone. There's the Egyptians eating alone, and then the brothers eating alone, because Hebrews and Egyptians didn't really get together like that. Egyptians saw themselves as higher than Hebrews, and so they didn't want to eat with them at the same table. And then as for Joseph, he was just in a higher position of authority, and so the regular Egyptians that were there didn't eat at the same table as the king here. And so it says that in verse 32 at the end there, the Egyptians didn't sit with these Hebrews because it says that is an abomination unto the Egyptians. So I guess this was a sort of case of racism, in lack of a better term, sort of in the same way how we saw Jews and Gentiles not eating together in the New Testament. And so that's where they're all sitting here. In verse 33, they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men marveled one at another. And he took and sent messes unto them from before him. But Benjamin's mess was 5 times as much as any of theirs, and they drank and were merry with him. And so they're sitting from oldest to youngest here, and they're marveling at each other because of that fact, because how did Joseph know, or how did any of these Egyptians know who was the oldest to youngest? So they were surprised that they got that right exactly. Of course, Joseph knew because these were his brothers, but that's unbeknownst to them so far. And so he lets Benjamin have more food than the rest of them because he likes him more than the other brethren here. And so that's the cause for that. But they're all happy now. They're all eating. They're all filled up and drinking. They're all married together. Happy state here, all of them. Not too much confusing things in this chapter of 43. Just pretty straightforward stuff of what's going on. And so, any questions before we move on? Yes, ma'am. How you said how old? I don't have really any idea. I don't think there's. I mean, I'm sure there's some information out there if someone's calculated all of it, but I don't think the Bible really reveals anything of how old specifically any of the brothers are. We know some of the older brothers have wives and children at this point. I don't know about Benjamin specifically, so I'm not too sure about that. Anyone else? Any questions or comments? In chapter 44 here, evidently when they were finished eating, Joseph, he commands the steward of his house in verse 1. He says, fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put every man's money in his sack's mouth, and put my cup, the silver cup, in the sack's mouth of the youngest, and his corn money. And he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. And so this is sort of the same thing that he did before of setting his brothers up for reasons of his own. In the Truth for Today commentary, it says of what Joseph's thoughts were, most likely of why he did this. While the servant did not know what was happening, the inspired narration shows that this test was intended to reveal the true attitude of the 10 elder brothers toward their younger sibling Benjamin. When they turned against him, when they had turned against, or as they had turned against Joseph so long ago, Joseph determined to increase the pressure on his brothers and see what they would do with an opportunity to rid themselves of the one remaining obstacle to Jacob's favor. This was Rachel's last son, Benjamin. So if they saw that he was the one with a silver cup, something worth a lot, and this for Joseph, and in that time, would they get rid of him, like have that as an opportunity, or would Joseph see that they had changed their attitude? That's a big thing that he's been trying to see this whole time as they've been here. Are they still the same, more selfish brothers, or have they changed their ways more? And so the servant does this as Joseph asks here, as they're going back home with their food. And so, verse 3, as soon as the morning was light, the men were sent away, and they and their donkeys. And they went up out of the city, and not yet far off, Joseph said to his steward, Up, follow after the men, and when thou dost overtake them, say unto them, Wherefore have you rewarded evil for good? In other words, why have you wronged the governor of Egypt this way, when he's done nothing but be kind to you? Verse 5, Is this not it in which my Lord drinketh, and whereby indeed he divineth? You have done evil in so doing. And he overtook them, and he spake unto them these same words. So the steward's doing what Joseph asks here when he overtakes them. So he tells them everything Joseph told him to. And so the brother's response starts in verse 7. They say, Wherefore saith my Lord these words? God forbid that thy servant should do according to this thing. Behold, the money which we found in our sack's mouth we brought again unto thee out of the land of Canaan. How then should we steal out of the Lord's house silver or gold? So we've been honest to you up to this point. Why would we steal anything in an actual manner? What would be the point in that if they've been honest thus far with everything they've done? So verse 9, With whomsoever of thy servants it be found, both let him die, and we also will be my Lord's bondsmen. So these were quite strong words coming from the brethren here, but they were sure they hadn't done anything wrong because they themselves hadn't. They hadn't stolen anything. This is sort of along the same lines as when Jacob and Rachel had first left Laban's house when they were going back to their homeland in Canaan. Rachel had taken idols from Laban's house, and when Laban went there to overtake them, they all pretended like they didn't do anything wrong. Rachel, at least, because she was the one who stole them, but all the other ones said very strong words. If any of us have stolen anything, you can do whatever you want with us. I don't remember exactly what they said, but along those same lines of being so sure that they hadn't done anything wrong. And so now this is the same thing the brothers are doing. Whoever has stolen it, let him die, and the rest of us even will be servants to you. And so they were sure they didn't steal anything. In verse 10, He, the steward, said, Now also let it be according to your words. He with whom it is found shall be my servant, and you shall be blameless. And so he's not saying anyone will have to die, but just the one that has stolen it will be a servant unto Egypt now. And so verse 11, They speedily took down every man his sack to the ground, and opened every man his sack. They're looking through everything here, ransacking all their belongings. And he searched, and he began at the eldest and left at the youngest, and then the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. So you could imagine as they go one by one, they're not finding anything, but the last one they find, there it is, the silver cup there. And so the brothers know what they had said before of someone being their servant, whoever had stolen it, so they know what's going to happen now. They're obviously in anguish and distress. That's why in verse 13 it says they rent their clothes. They tore them apart. They ripped them off themselves because they knew, oh man, Benjamin is about to have to go be a servant because he'd stolen this cup here. They had specifically told their father they wouldn't let anything happen to any of the brethren. They were just going to get food and come back. But now that's not going to be the case. Jacob had even said he would die if anything, die from sorrow if anything else happened to any of his sons. And so that's why they're so distressed here. They rent their clothes, but they had no other choice but to go back and deliver Benjamin back to them because that's the terms they agreed to. And so verse 13 rather, the end of it, they laded every man his donkey, and they returned to the city. Verse 14, Judah and his brethren came to Joseph's house, for he was yet there, and then they fell before him on the ground. And so they're all, again, in a respectful manner here. Reuben, as the oldest son, isn't leading this respectful circumstance here, but it says Judah and his brethren are here. And Judah is going to be the one who starts making pleas to Joseph to try to make things right here. And so Joseph sees them here, and he says unto them, What deed is this that you have done? Wot ye not, or know ye not, that such a man as I can certainly divine? And Judah said in verse 16, What shall we say unto my Lord? What shall we speak? How shall we clear ourselves? God hath found out the iniquity of thy servants. Behold, we are my Lord's servants, both we and he also with whom the cup is found. And so Judah, he's not only offering up Benjamin, but all of them as servants here to be servants unto Joseph. They don't want to leave their brother behind, but so here Judah is being a very selfless individual here, and certainly all of the brethren are, because they don't seem to speak up in any sort of way to disagree with him. And so certainly already their true feelings are being shown, and that they are changed individuals. They're not as, I guess, selfish and uncaring for their other brothers as they once were, but now they're willing to be servants with Benjamin. They weren't wanting to get rid of him here. So verse 17, Joseph said, God forbid that I should do so, that I should take all of you as servants, but the man in whose hand the cup is found, he shall be my servant. And as for you, get you up in peace unto your father. So Joseph, he's keeping up his image here as governor of Egypt. He doesn't want to punish all of them. He's not saying he does. But Judah now speaks up in a plea to tell Joseph all of what's going on here, of why they don't want to leave Benjamin here. This verses 18 through 34. It's a bit of a lengthy reading of his whole plea here, but it all flows well together of what he says. The main reason Judah is speaking out specifically here is because when they had first left, or the second time they left to go back to Egypt to get food, Judah had specifically said to his father, you can slay my children if we don't come back with Benjamin and Simeon and come back home. And so since Judah doesn't want anything to happen to his children, he is pleading with Joseph here to try to make things right with him. So we're just going to read 18 through 34 here to see exactly what Judah says. Something that I realized when I had first started doing this class, I had a lot more people read, and I realized I haven't done that in a while. And so if anyone wants to read this passage here, you're welcome to do so if anyone wants to, verses 18 through 34. You can just start reading if anyone wants to. (18 through 34). Yes, sir.
Then Judah approached him and said, O my lord, may your servant please speak a word in my lord's ear, and do not be angry with your servant, for you are equal to Pharaoh. My lord asked his servant, saying, Have you a father or a brother? And he said to my lord, We have an old father and a little boy born in my father's old age. Now his brother is dead, so he alone is left, and his mother
so you can see a very passionate and sincere plea from Judah here, trying to just keep things right between him and his father and him and Joseph here. Joseph would still have a servant. It wouldn't be Benjamin, but it'd be Judah here. If, if, if Joseph had just wanted to punish one individual for this, not all of them, and he could still do that with just Judah being the servant here. But we see Judah wanting to make things right very badly here with everything that's going on. He's certainly come a long way from a man who once was trying to seemingly deceive his daughter-in-law in earlier chapters about him. He's now a more selfless individual, wanting just to have things be right between him and anyone who he's against at this point. So what Judah is doing here is obviously very selfless to do. That's all of what he says to Joseph here, wanting to take Benjamin's place as a servant. And so we see Joseph's reaction in the next chapter, in chapter 45, of what he agrees to do with this. Any question before we see this? Yes, sir.
You might go back to the chapter 42, verse 37.
To verse 37.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that was Reuben who had said that? Who had said about his two sons? Okay. That's okay, yes, sir. Okay, I thought it was Judah. That's my mistake there. And so, okay.
Yeah, and then what you're referring to is in
43:8.
43:8. Where he's taking responsibility.
Okay. Thank you for that. That clears things up more. Okay. So I had said that a little wrong. It was Reuben who had said Jacob, or I think Jacob, right? Yeah. Reuben has said to Jacob that Jacob could slay his two sons if they didn't bring back Benjamin with them back from Egypt. And so, in verse 8 of 43 is where Judah was wanting to take responsibility here and make things right with his father. He hadn't said what Reuben said about the two sons in 42, but in chapter 43 and onward, he still trying to make things right in that sort of attitude and manner. So thank you, Mr. Nathan, for that, clearing that up there. But so yeah, that's all that happened there. Any other comments before we go on to chapter 45? Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
All back and forth between Joseph and his brothers. Kind of seems a little bit cat and mouse type thing. I'm wondering, and there may not be an answer to it, is God prompting Joseph to do these things in this order and toward what purpose, or is Joseph just cat and mouse mode to scare him? I mean, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But do you know anything? Do you have any thoughts about the purpose?
I wouldn't say, I don't know if God's hand is in specifically of everything Joseph is doing at this point with talking to his brethren. I don't think he's trying to scare them in any way. I think just trying to continue to see just what kind of people they are. And at this point, he sees they're pretty selfless people wanting to, at first all, be his servants, and Judah specifically now. I don't think he's specifically doing this to try to scare them, just see what kind of people they are after all these years here. And I mean, this cat and mouse game, as you call it, is going to stop here in chapter 45 anyway.
When he first was thrown in the pit and then sold, his brothers were very arrogant. The famine itself had brought them down, but had not brought them down to the level where they were ready to accept what was going on, because they still had money, they still had the ability to go back and forth. Joseph has brought them down to where
very great way to put it. That's a better answer than mine. So listen, sorry about that.
These men could also see, all Joseph's dreams before he was got into captivity all come true through all these things.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. Joseph specifically had mentioned that when they first came there and were bound themselves. It's all coming to pass here. So, any other questions or comments so far? So, chapter 45, Joseph's reaction to what Judah had said. Verse 1, he gets right into it here. Moses writes that Joseph, he could not refrain himself before all them that stood by him, and he cried, cause every man to go out from me. And there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. And so while he hid himself to cry before, he couldn't do that in time. He just started bawling then and there. He sees what kind of people they truly are now, being selfless. And so he says, everyone go out, everyone except these Hebrews here, of course. And so he had spoken in the Egyptian language to all the Egyptians there to leave, and now he's going to make himself known to his brothers here. So verse 2, he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard. So obviously this was some seriously loud crying here, very sincere tears Joseph had, of course. So Joseph said to his brethren in verse 3, simply, I am Joseph, doth my father yet live? His brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. So they were in complete shock. I'm sure anyone would be if they were in their shoes, seeing that this man who we've been in contact with so far is our brother Joseph, who we stole into slavery all those years ago. There must have been a million thoughts running through their mind, that a million miles per hour here, thinking, how is this possible? They might not even believed him at first when he first said it. They were just in such shock here. So he asked them, is my father yet alive? He knew he was. They had told him, I think 2 times now before, that their father was still alive, but this was him asking them as just their brother now, as Joseph here. He asked again, is my father yet alive? Must have been the first thing on his mind as he first made himself known to his brothers. And so, brothers still in shock here. So, verse 4, Joseph seemingly has to take it a little slow here. He explains everything. He says, come near to me, verse 4, I pray you. And they came near. He said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves, that you sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life. So, what a great way Joseph is already looking at it. When he first reveals himself to his brothers, he's not mad, he's not angry. He's telling not even them to be angry, to not have any regrets about what happened. He says, it's not even you who sold me into slavery, but it's rather God who brought me into this position to help you at this point in time. So this certainly confirms providence from God if it wasn't clear before. This clearly does state it now. He's saying, don't blame yourselves here. So he continues in verse 6. For these 2 years hath the famine been great in the land, and yet there are 5 more years, in the which there shall be neither be earing or harvest. And God hath sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you that sent me hither, but God. And he hath made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. And so, again, reiterating the same thing. It's the brothers did this physically, but God's hand spiritually led him to this moment. And so it's overall a good thing that they decided to sell him into slavery. So he's saying, don't have any regrets about it. And so he explains all this to them and tells them in verse 9, he says, haste ye, be quick, go up to my father and tell him that thus saith thy son Joseph, that God hath made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down unto me, and tarry not. Don't wait. Verse 10, thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen, and thou shalt be near unto me, thy children and thy children's children, thy flocks, thy herds, and all that thou hast. And there will I nourish thee, for yet there are 5 years of famine, lest thou and thy household and all that thou hast come to poverty. And behold, your eyes see in the eyes of my brother Benjamin that it is my mouth that speaketh to you. So Joseph here, he's offering for his family to stay with him in this land of Goshen here. Goshen, from what I've seen, we don't know the exact location of Goshen. It was definitely near Egypt. It was east of Egypt, but we don't know too much about this land of Goshen here. But he's saying that is where they can live as they are getting through this famine, just as everyone else. They can live close to Joseph, all of his family, and all of their herds. And so Joseph recognizes that Jacob might not believe them at first, and so he tells them that make sure Benjamin specifically says, even Benjamin has seen this all. Since Benjamin is now Jacob's favorite, or most likely at least his favorite, since Joseph had passed in Jacob's eyes, he might believe Benjamin more than the other brothers. And so if the other brothers' words don't convince Jacob, then maybe Benjamin's will for sure. And so, verse 13, you shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt, and of all that you have seen, and you shall haste and bring down my father hither. So tell them, do what I'm telling you, essentially. So verse 14, he fell upon his brother's Benjamin's neck, and he wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. Moreover, he kissed all his brethren, and wept upon them. And after that, his brethren talked with him. And so all seems to be being made whole once again after a broken family was once there. It's all now being made whole again. They're all crying, of course. That's expected, given the circumstances of what's going on here. He is more happy to see Benjamin, it seems, but I'm sure he overall loves all his brothers equally here. And they are all weeping, crying, and his brethren are talking with him, probably just wondering all the details of how we got to this point specifically. Probably talked for quite a while, I would imagine here. But as they talk, they end up getting ready to go eventually. But as they talk and commune after all these years here, in verse 16, it says that the fame thereof, of all that was happening with Joseph and his brethren here, it says that was heard in Pharaoh's house, verse 16, saying that Joseph's brethren are come, and it pleased Pharaoh well and his servants. And so all these Egyptians are hearing about what's happening, and they're all happy for Joseph. Pharaoh is already very fond of Joseph and everything he's done so far, so he's not mad about anything that's happening here. He's happy for Joseph. So verse 17, he says to him, say unto thy brethren, this do ye, take your beasts and go and get you into the land of Canaan. Take your father and your households and come unto me, and I will give you the good of the land of Egypt, and ye shall eat the fat of the land. And so now the brethren, they don't only have, Joseph's authority for this, but Pharaoh's as well, who is the only person higher than Joseph. So they now know they are doing really good here. And so verse 19, now thou art commanded, this do ye. It's a command from Pharaoh, not just telling them to, but a command. Go get them and come back. So obviously he's very happy for everything that's going on here. So he said, thou art commanded, this do ye. Take you wagons out of the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father and come. Also regard not your stuff, for the good of all the land of Egypt is yours. So they're not given any restrictions on to have to think about what they're bringing. They don't even have to really worry about their stuff, because anything in Egypt is theirs, Pharaoh says here. So being very kind to them, being very welcoming with open arms to them here. And so they end up going back, verse 21 and onward, through the rest of this chapter. We'll probably get through this chapter before we end here. And so, verse 21, the children of Israel, they did so. Joseph gave them wagons according to the commandment of Pharaoh. He gave them provision for the way. To all of them he gave each man changes of raiment. But to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of raiment. And so this once again shows Joseph's love for Benjamin more than his brethren, just favoring him more, not trying to rank them in any sort of way. But verse 23, and to his father he sent after this manner 10 donkeys laden with the good things of Egypt, and 10 she-donkeys laden with corn and bread and meat for his father by the way. And so there's gifts for his father also. In case they don't believe the words, they have these gifts that they can show they brought to give to their father as well. So very good things for that's going to be happening for the father. So verse 24, he sent his brethren away, they departed, and he said unto them, see that you fall not out by the way. So that's just another way to say, don't be fighting on the way home here. In chapter 42, verse 22, he had already witnessed them fighting when they reacted to surprising things from Joseph. So he's saying, as you travel back home, don't be fighting anymore. So verse 25 through 28, these last few verses here, they went out of Egypt and came into the land of Canaan, unto Jacob their father. They told him, Joseph is yet alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart fainted, for he believed them not. And they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said unto them. And when he saw the wagons which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. And Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is yet alive. I will go and see him before I die. So didn't believe him at first. Now he does. And so that's all of chapter 45 there. And so that's, I guess, 5 more chapters of this book. And then we'll be done. I thank you all for your attention.